Hey everybody, welcome to Gator Studio. Hopefully that intro didn't oversell Nitro for us, AJ.
We have a uphill battle to climb, Mike. That was a great video. So welcome to Gator Studio. Like Mike said, we appreciate you taking your time to be here, and we've got some exciting stuff to talk about today.
That's for sure. NITRO-X is the latest and greatest resin jointing sand for the hardscape industry. So I'm Mike Huber. I do much of the product development and training for Alliance. I've got AJ Gall. He's potentially the best rep at Alliance. If he's not the best rep, he's at least the most amusing. So hopefully you'll enjoy the show today.
I think I'll take that as a compliment, Mike, but I cover Western New York, Western Pennsylvania, and I work into Youngstown, Ohio. We also have two of our valued team members here. We have Tim, the tech wizard, on the ones and twos over there, making the show happen. And we also have my boy Jose, who's going to be kicking me and Mike questions from the chat, so that we can be sure that we're answering your questions as we go along here.
Right, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them into that chat. We'll do our best to answer them live or get back to you after the show. So without further ado, let's get rolling here. We're here to talk about NITRO-X, and it's pretty exciting for us, but to talk about NITRO-X, we almost have to take a step back and talk about polymeric sand first.
Before we can tell you about the future of the industry, we have to talk a little bit about the past. So we know you guys have been on shows, and a lot of you have probably seen us talk about polymeric sand. But tell me a little bit about polymeric sand, Mike, and tell me why someone might be gravitating towards the new product.
First of all, how many of you guys have used Nitro? We got a poll up there. I think a bunch of you have answered that for us. Looks like less than half have used a resin-based joining sand, including the Gator Nitro.
Somewhat surprising results. Nitro's been a fast-growing product, the fastest-growing product in our family of jointing material products for us. We've seen a lot of the industry gravitating towards resin-based sands, ultimately Nitro. And so some of you, this is not a refresher course for, which is exciting.
All right, so let's take a look at our agenda for the course today. We're going to talk mainly about NITRO-X, why resin sand, the NITRO-X features and benefits, and then wrap up with a little installation demo and video, just showing you how to install NITRO-X, because it's a little bit different than all the other resin sands out there. All right, AJ, polymeric sand, right? That's been the go-to jointing material for decades.
So I've been here for 11 years, and 11 years ago, we weren't talking about resin sands or Nitro or NITRO-X. So polymeric sand, a great, durable, and flexible jointing material. Industry standard for a long time. It resists weeds and erosion very well. And the way that it works, Mike, is it's swept into the joint, compacted into the joint, activated with water, and you end up with a maybe an inch thick crust of activated polymers on top of densely compacted gradient aggregate.
All right, so a bunch of different things that you threw out there that are important for moving forward to talk about Nitro. So first of all, it's meant to be a durable, cohesive joint material, right? It is going to be installed on a dry surface. We can't have any moisture in those pavers when we install polymeric sand, right?
It's a big challenge. I get countless calls every year of, hey, it's starting to rain. Do you think I could do poly sand later? Or it's supposed to rain later today. Do you think I could get away with it? It's always a tough question to answer.
So polymeric sands are pretty durable. They last a long time. They're a great joining material, unless you've got some challenging conditions or you skip some of those installation steps. If you don't compact or activate the sand right, you could potentially have some problems. And if you have a very wet environment, that can cause problems for polymeric sands. But for the most part, those polymeric sands are a durable, flexible, long-lasting joint material. And that flexibility is something I wanted to highlight real quick here, AJ.
Yep, so Mike's got a visual here, and that's some polymeric sand that's been activated and then been sitting in this jar of water here, and you can note the flexibility on that.
Right, so pretty cool stuff. Has some flexibility when it gets wet, dries out, it hardens back up. And hey, we've been using it for a long time with success, and it's not going away, right? Polymeric sand is here to stay. Nitro is going to be a great additional option, NITRO-X, adding to that toolbox that you have there, but it is not going to replace polymeric sand, that's for sure.
Not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to the jointing material, so different options, and we're going to talk about today some of the applications where polysand might be the option. Nitro, NITRO-X, it's going to depend on what it is you're installing.
All right, so one last thing on polymeric sand. We're going to do a little poll here. Are polymeric sands permeable? What do you think, AJ?
It's a good question.
You get asked that a lot?
I've had that question. I know the answer, and I'm not going to give it and make it easy for these guys.
All right, so let's see what that poll is saying. What do people think here?
Survey says
We need to get that poll up, and then we'll check it out. So, is polymeric sand permeable? We've got some answers coming in.
it's shifting there, Mike. All right, so is polymeric sand permeable? As the rest of you fill in your answers, I will tell you that it is not permeable.
It is not permeable. So I've got a cup that I made out of polymeric sand.
Polymeric sand cup.
Wasn't easy to do, but we did it. We're going to fill that cup up with water here. Do you see anything coming out the bottom?
Looks dry. Looks dry underneath there, Mike. So not permeable, almost impressively not permeable.
Right, so that water's sitting in there. You can see that on the overhead shot there, full of water and not going through. So polymeric sands can certainly get wet. We've all seen wet polymeric sand.
All the time.
Flexible, potentially suffering from excessive moisture. But polymeric sands are not permeable. They do not allow water to flow through them. And that is one key difference that you may see with those resin sands and a reason why they're popular, right?
It sounds like you're leading me into the resin sands, Mike. So let's go. Let's go down that path. Permeability, that sounds like that might be an exciting feature of these resin sands.
Well, let's actually poll the audience again. If you're using those resin sands, well, why are you using them?
So,
A couple different potential reasons, right? That permeability, you've got the installation on a wet or dry surface,
Yep.
and you've got strength top to bottom. AJ mentioned earlier that polymeric sands form a crust, right? That's a thick, durable, resilient crust, but it doesn't get as strong and hard as nitro.
right, and the big one for me is that installation of rain or shine. So did we put that poll up there, Mike?
Yep, we got it.
Okay.
So most people are saying install rain or shine, 50% of the audience. 20% say strength top to bottom, 30% say permeability. We didn't give them a choice of all of the above, right?
I think that would have filled up the answers, but all great reasons to use a resin-based sand. Like we talked about, the rain or shine installation really opens the season up, more time for you to make your money. Late fall, early spring, you're trying to tie up these hardscape projects. It's going to be a lot easier to do if you don't have to worry about if it rained the day before, if everything's dry.
All right, so resin sands are a little different than polymeric sands, right? They come in a sealed package. The resin, the glue that holds it together, is wet as opposed to a dry powdered material in polymeric sands. And it is oxygen cured. It cures with exposure to the air, not with water activation and drying. So let's take a step back to polymeric sand, right? We put polymeric sand in the joints, we compact, we activate it with water, and it cures by drying out. Once it dries, it's pretty hard. Every time it gets wet after that, it softens up a little bit, dries out, hardens up. Polymeric sand cycles from hard to soft with wet and dry conditions, doesn't it?
It's a great graphic to sort of illustrate what's going on, and we anticipate that it will become wet and dry many times over the course of the 15 years that polymeric sand is in there. So we think that when it's becoming dry, we find it to be very hard and rigid, and when it's wet, it's pliable and flexible, and that's by design.
All right, so let's compare that to the kind of cycle of a resin-based sand. What do you think that looks like, AJ?
My guess is it's going to be much less of a cycle. That doesn't look like a cycle at all there, Mike.
So you get it in the joint, and it hardens up.
That's it.
What happens after that?
End of story. It's hard. Your customer's happy. You are. It's wet. It's hard. It's dry. It's hard, and it's a rigid, strength, top to bottom jointing material.
And that's one of the things that we've found people love about Gator Nitro and resin-based sands, right? As long as you can get it into that joint there, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Sure.
That stuff's going to harden up. It's not going to soften up when it rains. You're not going to have any issues with a thin skin or a thin crust. So a little bit more foolproof than polymeric sands may be.
Another thing to mention on that installation, when we're comparing poly sand to resin sand, we've taken a piece of equipment off of the job when we're using the resin sand. So, Mike, you touched on it. When we're doing poly sand, you need to compact those pavers to consolidate that sand into the joint. It's a very important step. If that step is skipped, it can oftentimes lead to undesirable results. With resin sand, that's not a necessary step. So it's installed with the broom or the squeegee as well as a hose, and you're moving that material into the joint with the assistance of water, which ultimately takes care of the compaction for us.
Well, that's pretty cool, right?
Yep.
It certainly makes the installation a little bit simpler. And many people that install hardscape projects, well, the homeowners, the end user, they think that that joint should be like grout or mortar.
Right.
Polymeric sand may be pretty much like grout or mortar when it's dry in the Arizona desert, but
Sure.
in much of the rest of the world, wet conditions, polymeric sand can be soft and pliable. So if you're looking for that mortar-like joint, resin sands like Gator Nitro are definitely the way to go, aren't they?
I agree, and you can't stress that enough. Sometimes it's all about meeting that homeowner's expectation, and if they have an expectation of a mortar joint, the Nitro is going to be a lot closer to that than a polymeric sand.
All right, so we touted that permeability.
Sure did.
We've got a Nitro joint right here that we're going to take a look at. So let's get an overhead shot of that. We're going to put our water on this Nitro joint. And where's that water going, AJ?
It's drinking it right up, Mike.
Soaking right down through.
Proved your point there. So permeable material allows the water to penetrate that joint fairly easily, you can see there. And specifically in some of the installations where you're using a permeable base or a hybrid permeable install, this is really going to be a desirable jointing material.
All right, so you said that polymeric sand's not permeable.
Correct.
Nitro, pretty permeable. We're going to have to show you what NITRO-X does in a little bit, right?
Okay.
Compare the three. But
You've piqued my interest.
Hold that thought. So another poll question real quick. How many of you are installing with hybrid base? You're using that clean stone and 3/4 clean and a chip setting bed. Pretty popular in your area, right, AJ?
Very popular in my area. The industry seems to be gravitating towards that type of install. But I also know we got people joining us here in the chat from all over, and I'll be interested to see the results here. So take the time to answer that. Are you installing on hybrid base? And it looks like a resounding...
That's wild. I
Yeah.
wouldn't have expected that with our audience coming from all across the country. But 3/4 of the audience are installing on hybrid base.
Great, great. They're paying attention to what's going on out there.
All right, so that setting bed with hybrid base, what is that typically?
So that can vary a little bit, but they can be number 8s or number 9s chipstone, and that's noted for its drainage capabilities. So compared to the traditional install of bedding sand or Mike's favorite, the old stone dust installs, where drainage is not going to be a very easily thing to attain, the hybrid install is noted for its drainage.
So that's a quick growing installation method. We see it gaining popularity all over the country, especially the Midwest through the Northeast. Really has a lot of advantages, right? That clean stone is free draining, compacts easier, screeds easier, but it can be a little bit of a challenge when it comes to joint materials, right?
Well, for me, as a guy who sells polysand, the first thing I noticed was you sweep the polysand into one of those hybrid installed projects, and when you run the compactor over like we instruct you to, you lose an awful lot of that polysand. So you sweep it more in, you run the compactor over it again, you continue to lose because the polysand as a dry granular product has a tough time choking itself off in that bedding material because of all the void space.
All right, so let's take a look at that in real life. We've got a jar of number 8 stone, that's a 3/8 inch angular chip, and we're gonna put our polymeric sand into that joint. So we put our polymeric sand into that joint, we compact it and consolidate it, and where has that polymeric sand gone, AJ?
Goes down in there, and I get to sell you more polysand.
That polymeric sand disappeared right into that setting bed material. So until that stops migrating downwards, we've got a little bit of a problem, right? We can't densely pack our joints. That polymeric sand isn't going to perform well. If you skip the compaction or don't compact well enough, you might get a crust initially, but what's supporting that over time as that sand migrates downward?
Not much. And so we found that without that compaction step, regardless of the base or the bedding material, you're leaving 30 to 50% of that joint void of any material at all. So definitely worth compacting.
So what if you're using that number 9 stone, a 1/4 inch chip, right? That is doesn't have quite as much void space. We put our polymeric sand in there and we start compacting. Definitely better.
Better. Notably better, but you're still losing some in there.
Right, so some of that sand is still migrating downwards, not nearly as bad. So if you're doing polymeric sand in a hybrid base application, finding that number 9 stone, that 1/4 inch chip as opposed to the 3/8 inch chip is going to be a lot better for the lifespan, performance, and overall installation of your polymeric sand.
So Mike, nobody loves talking about polymeric sand more than me. But I'm guessing you got some resin sand, some nitro, some of the good stuff, and you're going to show us what that looks like in that hybrid permeable install.
Right, this show is supposed to be all about nitro, right, AJ?
Here we are talking poly.
So we've got our 1/4 inch chip, We're going to put some nitro on top of that, and nitro doesn't require any compaction. It's a little bit stickier, gummier, more cohesive because that resin's mixed in. Even if I tap this a few times, it's not migrating downwards, right? It's blocking itself off. It's going to cure from top to bottom, so we don't have to worry about settling or migrating down the road. Nitro and NITRO-X are going to be ideal joint materials for anyone doing hybrid base.
I agree with that, and I think that we talked about there will be different applications, but this is definitely an application where Nitro or NITRO-X is going to shine.
All right, so what else do we have to talk about with nitro? We talked about that strength, right? Hardening from top to bottom.
Yep.
With that strength, we do give up some flexibility, don't we?
It's a very rigid material, so while you get that strength top to bottom, you want to make sure that you're building your project so that it can drain and that you're not going to have movement in that system, because this is a rigid material and it's not going to respond well to considerable movement in a hardscape project.
All right, so we soaked a piece of nitro in water, just like we soaked that polymeric sand in water. And what kind of flex do we have here, AJ? I'm not seeing much flex.
Looks less flexible than me, Mike.
As we got a little blurry shot there. Can we get that focused a little bit? As we try to flex this, it's pretty strong, but it's not bending, and I broke it.
There it is, Mike, powered through. So trade-offs, right? Pros and cons and different features of both of these products. They're not the same thing, and Mike's helping to explain and help understand why you might reach for one of these two options.
All right, so do we have any questions, Jose? Anything you want to throw out for us at this point?
We do have one from Candace. Can you use nitro to do a repair job, resanding joints more narrow?
Can you do a repair job resanding joints? So you certainly could. You'd have to remove whatever material was in those joints as close to the full depth of the paver as possible. And there are some joint limitations on nitro. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you can't do anything tighter than a 3/16 inch joint with the original Gator Nitro.
The other thing I would mention on that is I've seen a lot of guys and girls use nitro as a reinstallation product, because maybe the poly sand in this installation was having a tough time with moisture or moss or mold. And so depending on that joint size, nitro might be exactly what those joints need.
All right, anything else?
That is all for right now.
All right, sounds good. Well, I think that kind of sums up that resin sand category. We're going to play a quick video for you on the original Gator Nitro while we move to our demo area, where we'll dive in a little bit deeper on the nitro, the new NITRO-X, and that installation. All right, we're back.
There you have it. So a lot of you, like we saw in the pool, have used nitro. So that's not news to you. For those of you who haven't, that should be a pretty exciting video.
It's a pretty exciting product for us. You know, we've sold polymeric sand for closing on 25 years now. Nitro is a new product. Those resin-based sands have been one of the fastest growing categories for us as far as products go. So really seeing a lot of people try them out and continue to use them.
So that nitro is a great option when you're talking about a paver that has a 3/16 inch joint all the way up to a 2-inch joint. And you would find the installation to be different than poly sand, like we discussed. But it's a optimal choice for a paver like that. But what if that paver didn't offer you that 3/16 inch joint, Mike?
Well, you really wouldn't like Gator Nitro if you had a tight joint, right? If you're talking about something smaller than 3/16, really, you got to go back to polymeric sand.
Right.
So it was a limitation. You've got that resin mixed with the aggregate. It's a little bit stiffer, a little bit gummier. It's not free-flowing and granular, so it is tougher to get into the joint. Now, when we launched Gator Nitro, we designed our proprietary resin that made Gator Nitro twice as strong as the competitors and faster setting. Really well received. Did a great job. You got that strength top to bottom, install wet or dry. It was good for pedestrian or light vehicular traffic.
Right, which were industry first with the light vehicular traffic, as well as that proprietary resin allows us to recommend the installation of nitro around swimming pools and saltwater pools and in all kinds of applications. So great product, Mike. Like you said, there's a lot of reasons why nitro would be a great solution, but potentially there are two limitations to nitro as a product, and one is that joint size. What we found was if it didn't have a 3/16 inch joint, you were trying to install it, not only, like Mike said, would it be very frustrating to do, a lot of times guys would leave it high in the chamfer and they would think that they had it in there, but you're being left with only about 1/8 of an inch of material.
Right, that's kind of what you're looking at here. So if you take a look at this paver, that's kind of the cross-section of what you were seeing. Let's see if we get a better focus on that, Tim. That's kind of what you were seeing as you thought you had the joint filled up, but there was a lot of void space underneath. So you got some of that material right up top, but underneath, mostly empty.
Right, and so that's not going to do well for the longevity of that product, and that material that is on the top will have a tendency to trickle down in there and ultimately disappear. So.
Yeah. And at the time, we said 3/16 as a minimum joint width for nitro. There were some competitors that claimed 1/8 of an inch. We tried them all, and how did they work, AJ?
We found very similar results. So it was just very difficult to get those existing resin-based sands into those joints. So.
And that was a challenge, and the colors were a little bit of a challenge. So with the Gator Nitro, that resin tended to darken the aggregate. So we weren't really able to do light colors with the original Gator Nitro. In fact, if you take a look at our samples here, you're going to see that we've got our beige from our polymeric sand, right? Get that in the right camera angle there. So beige from our polymeric sand, pretty light.
Light colored beige looks great on a light colored paver.
Then we had beige from Gator Nitro.
A notable difference. So it's something you would have to take into consideration. You guys are getting very creative with your design choices, and the color is notably different. So it was a limitation because the resin that is in nitro, it naturally darkened the sand particles, and that was the color offering that we had.
So quite often, you're trying to use both polymeric sand and nitro on the same project.
Right.
Or you're working with the kind of modern style of pavers that seems to be trending lighter and lighter and lighter in color tone. So we're not seeing those darker browns, the darker grays. Everything's lighter these days.
Right. So it sounds like, Mike, you got a lot of positive and good things to say about nitro, and we have two limitations: that joint smaller than a 3/16 inch, and potentially, depending on how you look at it, the color being darker than it has been accustomed to with the polymeric sand. So you got something to address those limitations?
Well, of course. That's the whole point of today's show. So NITRO-X solves both of those problems. We're able to do a 1/8 inch joint and truly get that material installed from top to bottom with ease because of the rapid flow technology in NITRO-X. And we've got some great colors, including some really light colors that I think everyone's going to be pretty excited about.
So this is the part of the show that I'm excited about. So we're going to give you another video, and then we're going to get busy over here on these pavers showing off this new innovative product.
All right, that looks pretty cool. Why didn't we just do that 4 years ago when we launched Nitro?
I've been asking you the same question all week, Mike. Make the nitro particles smaller. We can get them into a smaller joint. Problem solved, right?
It's not quite that simple, AJ. You can't just use a smaller particle. If you go to a smaller particle, then all of a sudden you have more of them. Think about having a trash can full of basketballs and a trash can full of golf balls in your garage, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Which one has more particles?
I'm going to say the golf balls.
Right, you're going to have a lot more golf balls in that trash can, right? So there's more weight, there is more friction, there's more surface area. That doesn't make it easier to move, even though those particles are smaller. So we've got that potential problem. Plus, we need more resin, right? There's more surface area. We have to coat those particles with even more resin. And hey, resin's a kind of expensive component to the nitro. We can't make this stuff cost $500 a pail.
Yeah, I'll take your word on that, Mike. That's why Mike's here. He has the important information. I just thought smaller particles would be just fine. So I saw something in that video about rapid flow technology. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Well, rapid flow technology is how we made that nitro get into that 1/8 inch joint with ease. So rapid flow technology combines a brand new resin and a smaller particle size. So that brand new resin helps us with the flowability of the NITRO-X, keeps those smaller particles moving and gliding and working their way into the joint when combined with water. And that's part of the key process too. The installation is a little bit different than you're used to with existing resin-based sands.
And so this is an important part for the people on that poll at the very beginning of the show that said, yeah, we have used nitro. You find yourself at your dealer grabbing buckets of NITRO-X thinking, I've done nitro before, Mike. I know what I'm doing. We're sweeping it. We're brooming it. We're washing it off. It is a little bit different. So we're going to get into that, right?
Yep, that is for sure. And it's also that brand new resin in the rapid flow technology that allowed us to do those lighter colors. It doesn't darken the aggregate the same way that the original nitro resin did. So still a hydrophobic resin, right? We can wet down the surface to protect it from staining. That's an integral part of the installation process. But it is a really cool new color palette, which you can see right there. The platinum and vanilla, definitely going to be big sellers in the NITRO-X.
I agree, and I've seen that in my market. A lot of those modern pavers are calling for a lighter joining material. So we come back over to this overhead view, and you can see we had talked about that darker nitro versus the traditional poly sand, which is a lighter beige. And you're going to show us that NITRO-X, Mike.
So NITRO-X in the taupe color is pretty darn close to the original beige of our polymeric sands, much lighter in tone than the beige of the nitro.
I like options, Mike, and you are giving me a few there. So
we have some great color options. I think that it opens up a new dimension for the hardscapers out there that are working with porcelain tile in lighter tones in some of these lighter colored concrete pavers. So pretty cool options out there with the colors, AJ.
Agreed. So talking about NITRO-X versus nitro. Now we've moved from that 3/16 was our cutoff, right? And then these pavers here have an 1/8 inch joint. So this would have been something that we could have swept nitro back and forth, and we could have got some down into that chamfer maybe, but I think if we had let it cured and separated these, we would have been disappointed to see how much nitro was actually in there.
It's important to realize that an 1/8 of an inch joint is 50% smaller than a 3/16 inch joint. That's a huge difference, right? You're trying to squeeze that sand down into a very tight joint in between concrete pavers that have spacer bars blocking off some of the area, a rough concrete texture, so you've got some friction that you're fighting against. It was a challenge to develop a sand that we were confident would fill that joint up from top to bottom. Again, remember, we don't want this to happen, right? We don't want to have that sand kind of bridging at the top or in the chamfer and leaving a bunch of void space underneath. What we're looking for is something more like this, where that polymeric sand is going to go down into the joint and it's going to fill everything up from top to bottom. Now, these void spaces here are where the spacer bars hit, right? That was actually blocking off the entire joint. But you see that in between, we're filling everything up from top to bottom. That's going to give us proper interlock. That's going to prevent that nitro from potentially crumbling down the road and dropping down into the joint, leaving an empty gap.
Right.
So really cool how that rapid flow technology allows that sand to get down all the way to the bottom of the joint and fill it up to the top.
That paver you just showed is a powerful visual. That's a well-filled joint, and like you said, that's important for the interlock and for the whole system.
Right. Remember, we're not compacting. It's not granular and dry and free-flowing. So I think we kind of beating it to death here,
Right.
but it's a big deal. It's a head and shoulders improvement over anything else out there on the market, even some of those other sands that claimed they could do a 1/8 inch joint.
So since we're in the conversation of nitro versus NITRO-X, so to speak, talk to me a little bit about the permeability. So we promoted nitro as a permeable material, right? NITRO-X, a smaller aggregate, a different resin. Does that affect the permeability at all?
Sure. Let's do that visual of the original nitro and the permeability again. So if you take a look at this, I'm spraying my water in there, and you can see it starts to trickle out, and it's draining right through. Now we've got the same size cup built out of NITRO-X, AJ. So what are we thinking?
I'm guessing you're going to get less of the water running through there? Hopefully some, right?
Yeah, it's going to run through a little bit slower. So our permeability is decreased, right? It is going to be a lot lower than the original nitro, but it is still permeable. It will still allow water to flow through it, just at a slower rate.
And that's probably a product of that smaller aggregate and those particles, like you were talking golf balls versus basketballs, those particles being more densely compacted together.
Right, you've got less void space in there, right? So obviously there's less pathways for water to flow. In fact, you can take a look at this little chart. Shows you that polymeric sand is essentially impermeable. No water is flowing through that. Through the NITRO-X, you're getting 0.17 gallons per minute per square foot, but through the original nitro, you're getting 1.1 gallons per minute per square foot. So you can see the relative permeability of all of these joint materials, and that's for the beige color. Permeability varies a little bit by color because of the size and shape of those aggregates.
Mike, you sure do your homework here, don't you? You got some interesting numbers up there.
We try to. We try to do our best there, AJ.
So we have the differences. We have the joint limitations and how we can get into a smaller joint. We have the color. We have the different aggregate size. What are some of the things that are the same about NITRO-X and nitro? Do we maintain and keep any of those benefits that we had from nitro?
Well, we keep all of those characteristics that we love about resin sands, right? So you've got the a little bit less permeable, but you've got the installation rain or shine.
Right.
Right. So wet or dry, we can go out and install NITRO-X. You've got strength top to bottom, very strong, a little bit less permeable, but that rapid flow technology allows us to do a true 1/8 inch joint. So let's revisit that 1/8 inch joint a little bit, AJ.
Okay. Yep.
Let's throw up that last poll question there. What do you think the joint width is on a typical 4x8 Holland stone?
This is where I feel like you're tricking our audience, Mike. Are you trying to set a trap here?
No, we're just trying to help them from making a mistake.
Education. All right, good. Good. So those Holland stone, you see them a lot of times on the border, the soldier course or the sailor course of these projects.
Or it might be a 6x9,
could
perhaps.
be a 6x9.
They're popular for a border.
Yep. And so when you see that, and we're going to see what that pool says.
Looks like most people think it's 1/8 of an inch, and then the remainder's split between 1/4 and 1/16.
And I will be honest, if I didn't know the answer to this question, I would have fallen in that 1/8 of an inch group as well.
All right. So what we're here to show you is that when you have a Holland stone paver, your joint's actually a little bit tighter than 1/8 of an inch. So right here we've got our 1/4 inch spacer, and you can see nowhere even close to fitting, right?
Not getting in there. Not
We've got
happening.
our 3/16 inch spacer. So again, not going to quite fit in there. And you might have some differences manufacturer to manufacturer, but the spacing between Holland stones is pretty tight. Here's our 1/16 inch spacer, so that we can finally get wedged down into that joint there.
So you're saying poly sand.
I'm saying if you're doing your first generation pavers, your typical 6x6, 6x9s, your Holland stones, your 4x8s, that's a polymeric sand joint all day long.
So it sounds like what you said before, Mike. There's different reasons to do different products, and we've got an offering that kind of completes the whole picture, so you have the right product depending on what you're using.
All right, so let's haul that off,
rid of
AJ,
this. Yep.
and let's take a look at the joints on our test area here. So we got that 1/4 inch, doesn't fit, right? But our 1/8 inch spacer is fitting, right? So we're getting that 1/8 inch in there.
True 1/8 inch joint.
We're good to go with NITRO-X.
That's what you keep telling me, Mike. We're going to find out.
We are going to find out soon.
You ready? You ready for this?
We're not going to do the demo quite yet, AJ.
All right, I'm excited.
Let's talk about the pail.
Talk about the pail. So 27.5 pound bucket of the NITRO-X.
Oh, wait a minute. I thought Nitro came in a 40-pound pail.
It does. We're talking NITRO-X, Mike. So
All right, so original Nitro came in a 40-pound pail. NITRO-X is coming in a 27.5-pound pail. Why is that, AJ?
So I would assume that part of that is our competition has 27.5-pound pails. And when you're comparing these by price, sometimes we would be talked out of that conversation because of that 40-pound pail.
Exactly. If everyone's selling a smaller bucket, we're selling that larger pail and we're more expensive. Sometimes the sticker shock is a little bit difficult to overcome. Pound for pound, we're competitive, but now we're selling the same size pail as many of our competitors are selling. Plus, when you are actually working with the NITRO-X, it helps to work with smaller quantities. We've got to kind of work the NITRO-X together with some water, turning that material into a slurry. You can't take 50, 60 pounds of NITRO-X in one spot and efficiently work it and get it to flow into the joints. So having a smaller pail is going to help with that installation process.
And you're going to see that here. That's one of those differences we talked about in terms of installation for Nitro, traditional versus NITRO-X. But talking about the pail, Mike, this pail seems pretty considerable. So
it's still a pretty tough, robust pail, and that was something that we carried over from our original Nitro. It's a really important factor. This is an air-cured resin-based sand. So
Right.
what happens if the packaging got damaged?
no bueno. If you have a damaged package that allows oxygen in there, you're going to have air-cured material in your bucket before you're ready to use it.
All right, so contractor goes to buy 10 pails, and they get to the job site, and they find out 3 of them are rock hard, right?
That's a big problem, especially if they're on a time strain, which they usually are. So in this bucket, you would find a bag that is sealed off with nitrogen to prevent oxygen from infiltrating that bag. That bag is then put in this bucket, which is infused with nitrogen and then sealed off a second time. So double the protection, the best packaging in the industry by a long shot.
We even dropped this from 45 feet to make sure that it was going to be the best packaging in the industry and make sure that it would get to the job site properly. So the robust packaging that we offer ensures a long shelf life and that product's going to get to the job site ready to use. So seems like a small thing, but it makes a big difference.
Worth noting.
All right. So I guess we could probably get to the install here, huh?
Do we have install or should we ask for questions?
Let's take some questions.
Okay.
Got
What
a
we got,
question.
Jose?
Got a question for Breed. How does this perform in flood areas?
How does this perform in flood areas? Well, I don't think anything performs really well in flood areas. North Carolina can attest to that.
Yeah.
Depends on what's happening. I mean, if you've got moisture-prone areas, Nitro or NITRO-X could be an ideal joint material. Polymeric sand cycle, right? Wet, dry. That cycle can happen a million times until it doesn't cycle, right, AJ?
Right.
What
Wet,
happens if
wet.
we get wet all the time?
At some point, the polymeric sand is begging to be dry. That's where it derives its strength. So if it's wet all the time and it's not drying out, eventually and I don't have a time frame, maybe you do, Mike, but eventually the poly sand will disintegrate and just go to nothing because it's never been allowed to dry out.
Right, so the resin-based sands, they don't soften up when they get wet. So in some of those moisture-prone environments, they can perform pretty well. Plus, they're permeable, so
Right.
if you have an issue with some water, it can potentially allow that to drain into your hybrid base, work its way into the soils, and dissipate. So could be a great option for those moisture-prone areas. Probably wouldn't recommend it for constant flooding.
Good answer for a tough question, Mike. What else we got, Jose?
What is the flow rate?
What is the flow rate? Well, that is on our TDS sheet. It's going to vary based on color. So the original NITRO-X, the original Nitro, silver is our most permeable color. That's about 2 gallons. I think it's like 2.2 gallons per minute per square foot, down to 0.7 gallons per minute per square foot for the black color. The NITRO-X, similar variation, but you're ranging from about 1 gallon per minute per square foot to 0.15 gallons per minute per square foot.
That's good information to have. To the best of my knowledge, we're the only manufacturer that's published those flow rates. So if you have someone who's speccing this job, we have the information. We can, based on color, tell them how many gallons of water will flow through that material.
Now, if you're talking about a real permeable job, typically that's getting a number 9 stone, an
Right.
aqua rock, right? So an aqua rock, a clean chip, typically has a flow rate around 3 gallons per minute per square foot. So these are all lower.
Right.
In some cases, significantly lower. So if you're talking about a true permeable job, make sure that the municipality, the engineer that's working on that job is going to accept the flow rate of Gator Nitro and the maintenance schedule. And the maintenance would be what, AJ?
For the nitro, you're talking a pressure washer, which is also new compared to the old polysand install. Take a pressure washer to your polysanded joints, and you're probably going to be chunking some of that out and having to come back and touch up some of those joints, which is not really the desired outcome. But with the nitro, you have those joints cured. After 30 days, they're power washer safe. You could come through on a end of season or beginning of spring maintenance, give that patio and project a nice cleaning with the pressure washer, and maintain the joints.
Right. So obviously a joint outdoors is going to clog up. Power washing, it can help maintain that permeability, but it is going to kind of decrease over time.
Right.
What else do we have, Jose?
Can you install NITRO-X over traditional base?
Can you install NITRO-X over traditional base? You definitely can.
Yep, I've got a lot of guys doing it. So
Well, you got a lot of guys doing nitro over traditional base,
correct,
right? So,
correct.
all right, that's a kind of a questionable area, right? It's a pretty permeable joint material. You've got a base that doesn't really drain freely, but it does work. We've seen many people do it with success. NITRO-X is probably a better option for those traditional base jobs.
less permeable, therefore less of a chance of creating a problem in that install.
All right, what else?
Last question, can NITRO-X grow moss or mildew over a shady area?
Sure can.
Yep.
Anything can grow moss or mildew in a shady area. The siding on your house, AJ, if I put them out in a wet, damp, shady environment, is going to grow moss, mold, and mildew. Do you have any on you?
A little bit on my back, but you can pressure wash that off later, just like you could your nitro or your NITRO-X. So moss, mold, mildew, conditions of the environment, really.
Right. If the conditions are right and appropriate, it will grow. So,
But the ability to come through with a pressure washer and blast that right off is definitely a feather in the cap of the nitro and the NITRO-X.
all right. Well, let's keep plugging away here.
Let's do it,
I think
Mike.
it's time to get into the install.
What do we have here?
So here's our bag of NITRO-X, 27.5 pounds, as we talked about. So what kind of coverage are we looking at, AJ? Say you got a 50-pound bag of polymeric sand, and all right, that does 70, 80 square feet per bag.
Right. So obviously, the first thing you're going to consider is the joint size. So depending on joint size, I get the question all the time is, how much coverage do I get out of this? What paver are you installing? How thick is the paver? Is this porcelain tile? Is this 2 3/8 inch concrete paver?
Well, the way I look at it is typically people are generally comfortable with estimating polymeric sand, right? They say, all right, I know how much polymeric sand I need on this. The NITRO-X is going to cover about half the area of a polymeric sand bag, right? We're about half the weight.
It's a good rule of thumb.
Pretty easy way to look at it. We have a calculator online. If you need a little bit of assistance, you could also call your local rep.
Give us a call.
All right. So this bag, heavy duty, this is pretty tough plastic. Can you tear your way in there?
I mean, I probably could, but
So that's the protection for the product that we're talking about, right? We don't want air getting to that before it's ready to be opened up and used on the job site. You don't want a hardened up block of NITRO-X. So very robust packaging, very important to make sure that product gets to you ready to use, and we're pretty proud of that.
I'm not getting in there, so go ahead and cut us open, Mike.
All right, well, I can't cut it open yet. We didn't wet down the pavers.
Good point. That was a mistake on my behalf. So whether it's nitro or it's NITRO-X, the first step is watering and wetting down not only the pavers you're going to be installing on, as well as your tools, as well as your surrounding hardscapes, anywhere your guys are going to be walking. You don't want to track this resin when it's in the water and you're working around in a wet resin puddle. Track it off site onto part of the project that doesn't have water, because you could leave a translucent stain, correct?
Yep, that resin can bond to any dry surface, right? It's a hydrophobic resin, so that water repels it, but if you happen to get it on your boots, your shoes, you're walking around the job site, you could leave boot prints all over the place. If you don't wet the surface down well enough, it's possible that the entire project's going to almost look like you have a blotchy sealer on there.
Right. And so what I've found is potentially the most important guy on the job side is the hose guy. This guy's busy. He's keeping everything wet. As piles of sand are being dumped down, he's keeping those wet, specifically with the NITRO-X. and turning them with that rapid flow technology into a flowable, almost slurry. But he's also being cognizant of what everyone else is doing and trying to keep that wet as well.
All right, so you're the most important guy on the job today,
I didn't want to
AJ.
say it, Mike, but I got to say it. So
I'm going to slice this open and dump some of our NITRO-X out, so you
and
can
I'm going
see
to
that
start
there.
putting water on it.
All right. So AJ's going to start putting water on this. It's kind of stiff if you try to push it around without water. But as it gets the water in there, you can see how quickly it almost changes state from a solid to a liquid, slurry-like material. And that liquid slurry is what easily flows down into the joints. That's the rapid flow technology working here.
Rapid flow technology at work. And I've installed a lot of nitro. That is not the case with nitro. This is where the installation becomes different. You certainly want to wet everything down with the nitro, but you find yourself using the hose to kind of move some of that material.
All right, that's pretty good, AJ. I think we're good on our little test area here.
Yep. As that's become soaking wet material, it seems pretty easy for you to maneuver around there, Mike.
It is. It flows around very well when it's mixed with water, but if you stop watering for a little while and it starts to dry out, it does become stiffer. Now we're going to get to another difference between the nitro and the NITRO-X. Usually, once we got that nitro spread around, filled the joints, we would hose it off pretty aggressively to clean the surface and set the joint height, right?
Right. That was always my favorite part of the nitro install. It's one of those oddly satisfying things you get to do. You'd set the hose onto like fan or a cone, and you'd come through. I'd hurt my back
Yeah, a little
squatting down.
angle, right?
Yeah, and you'd get moving, and you're basically shaving off that sand that's too high, setting the joint very easily, and you're hitting all the joints. But this is where it changes. The NITRO-X, because of that finer aggregate and that rapid flow technology, in doing that, you're going to move more of the product than you really want to.
Right. You'd wash out material from the joint if you're trying to use that same process to set the joint height. So we actually have to set the joint height mechanically using our broom rather than using the water itself. So if we kind of use that broom to set our joint height here, it's not going to dislodge as much material. So we mechanically set that joint height. And where should that be, AJ?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up, Mike, because I was going to ask. So with poly sand, we always stress the importance of that 1/8 of an inch reveal below the chamfer. I'm guessing the same rules apply with your NITRO-X.
Pavers look the best when that joint is set low, right? Having that sand flush makes it look like a one-dimensional surface.
Right.
Pavers are meant to have texture. They're meant to be three-dimensional. So setting that joint height nice and low really allows those pavers to look the way they're supposed to, the way they were designed, and give you that nice, individual unit paving appearance rather than some monolithic slab. So 1/8 of an inch below that chamfer.
Yeah, nothing new there. You're keeping it 1/8 of an inch both for the aesthetic and for the longevity of the project. You're protecting your jointing material.
So we're kind of using that broom to set the joint height, and we're going to use that hose on a more gentle shower setting to rinse off any excess particulate matter from the surface and clean things up.
And while you heard it here, I would tell you again, call your Alliance rep out. Have us out, and we'll work on the project. Because if you're using nitro with success, we want you to use NITRO-X with success, but there are nuanced differences.
Yep, you got to change your installation method a little bit in order to successfully install this NITRO-X. So we going to rinse this off a little bit for me, AJ? Get a little bit of that stuff hosed off there. Now this leftover material, just like the Gator Nitro, can get thrown back in the bucket that it came in. We cover it with water. That's going to prevent the oxygen from getting to it, and it is going to probably last for 4 or 5 weeks. You can use it on your next job. Not going to have to throw that away.
Yeah, I'm cheap. I'm taking every granular particle of that with me off onto the next job site.
So how about that permeability? You want to hose that off
Yep.
again? We'll see if we get a close-up and take a look at that. So you can definitely see that water soaks into it, doesn't soak in quite as fast
There it goes.
or quickly as it does with the original Nitro.
So it's still permeable in the sense that it will still take that water and allow it to penetrate, but
Just a lower flow rate.
at a lower rate.
All right. Couple other things to note, with that new resin that we developed for the rapid flow technology, the Gator NITRO-X is even stronger than Nitro. So Nitro, way stronger than polymeric sand.
Yep.
NITRO-X is even stronger than original Nitro. So gaining some strength there. Still don't have any flexibility, unfortunately. That's just a characteristic of this product class. With the resins, the way that they work, the way they cure, You just can't have any flexibility like a polymeric sand does.
But that is comfortable to know that we are increasing in strength as we move to this new product, because you've got a strong, rigid material that's going to last a long time in that joint.
So just like original Nitro, with NITRO-X, we can do residential driveways, light vehicular traffic. In that driveway, we've got a couple things that we want to be aware of, though.
Yeah. One of which, Mike, I'm going to let you talk about because I sound uneducated when I try to explain aspect ratio. But you got to make sure you have the right paver for that driveway if you're going to expect that the jointing material is not going to be an issue.
Right. We want to minimize the movement, right? Movement is what's going to potentially cause cracking in the joint. So if we have an actual paver, now that's a concrete paving unit where the aspect ratio is less than 4:1, right? The longest side divided by the thickness is less than 4, we're good to go, right?
Right.
If you have large slabs, some of these paver manufacturers are making some pretty large pieces of concrete. Guys using them in driveways, well, what happens when someone drives over one side of that paver?
You see it.
The other side lifts right up, right?
Right.
Not ideal. Your best bet's polymeric sand in those applications.
So again, different products for different hardscape solutions.
And with those driveways, what about the laying pattern?
It's important. It's important to take into consideration, and it goes back to what you were saying. We don't want something that's going to be unstable and have a nitro joint because it's a rigid material.
Right. So we want to avoid running bonds, extended bond lines. If we've got good interlock, herringbone pattern,
Right.
something similar along those lines, I guess your potential for movement is much lower.
Right.
That NITRO-X is going to perform much better in that application. How about warranty on NITRO-X? What are we talking?
So I think that is a great question, Mike. Why don't you tell me about it?
Warranty on NITRO-X is 5 years, just like original Nitro. And we're being cautious. I think we're being very conservative there. We've got a lot of experience, a lot of history with polymeric sand. Nitro is still a relatively new product to us. But the installs we have that are 4, 5, 6 years old are all doing great.
Right, and I think that those installs were installed appropriately. So when you're talking about the way that this stuff works, it cures top to bottom. We talked about the strength, we talked about the permeability, but if you have a failure in that system that's not a byproduct of our resin material, and you see some separation of that resin material, we don't really consider that to be a failure of the jointing.
So, effectively, what we're building on here is the success and popularity and the performance of the original Gator Nitro. With the rapid flow technology, NITRO-X can do a 1/8 inch joint. Really cool,
Yep.
right? We can do that tighter joint. We have a little bit less permeability, which may be a desirable feature for
Yeah.
that traditional base job. Guys
Absolutely.
that haven't done a hybrid base or accounted for that water flow. And we get some cool new colors. So those new colors are fantastic options for some of the lighter toned pavers and tile out there.
This product really helps us tie it all together. We've said it, I've said it 3 times already, but different products for different solutions. But now we have something that both in terms of aesthetic with the color, both in terms of size of aggregate, depending on the joint size, we have something to cover most of the things that you're going to see.
Oh, I'd say everything that you're going to see, right?
There you go.
If you have to go to
Trust you.
polymeric sand for a tight joint,
Right,
if you've
right.
got to go to Gator dust for a regular natural stone,
Yeah.
I think we cover all the bases with hardscape joints, AJ.
You heard it here. Everything. We've got it all. Everything under the sun.
All right, we have any questions, Jose?
We have a question coming in from Dave, 2-part question. How long would it last within the joints? And when it starts to break down, how do you remove it?
All right, so how long does it last in between the joints?
At least 5 years.
At least 5 years. We haven't really seen any of it fail. Now, we've seen some issues where pavers or stones were moving. If pavers or stones start to move, separate, well, you're going to get a crack in between that paver or stone and the nitro itself, right?
Right.
Not a nitro failure. That's movement occurring on the job site. The joint's not designed to be flexible. The nitro's still hard in all those cases.
Right. Rock hard. Yeah.
But
Top to bottom.
the movement is a problem. Now, what do you do when you need to potentially replace Gator Nitro?
I can answer that, Mike.
It's not easy.
No, it's a couple guys with oscillating DeWalt tools.
Well, that seems silly.
Yeah, well, it wasn't effective or efficient, but had to be done.
So NITRO-X is a really strong material. Nitro is a strong material. You can't just power wash those out, right? 30 days later after install, they're power washer safe.
Yep.
What are you going to do? Lift up all the pavers, pull the NITRO-X away? Probably not ideal.
It's not going to be a fun day for your guys, and it's not going to be something that's done in a efficient manner of time.
Right. So what we're finding at this point is that, nitro is a long-lasting joint material.
Right.
It's strong. It is durable. It's standing the test of time. Hey, eventually it is going to degrade and break down, but at that point when that happens, pressure washing it out should be possible. So what's the second part of that question, Jose?
I think you got them both.
You got them both already.
Excellent. Nailed it.
2 for 1, Mike.
Anything else, or are we good?
I got Rob William asking, is a solvent-based sealer a problem?
Nope, solvent-based sealer is not a problem. Saturating the nitro or NITRO-X in solvent for an extended period of time is a problem.
Sure.
Nothing really likes to be saturated in solvent for extended periods of time, but the sealer itself is not going to cause a problem. It's going to bond well to the surface. Now, it will decrease the permeability.
Right. I find solvent-based sealers to be the opposite of a problem. They're oftentimes a great solution to your hardscape projects. But like you said, Mike, when you put that solvent-based sealer, film-forming sealer on top of that joint, it will decrease the permeability.
All right. Anything else, Jose?
Can you install NITRO-X on a concrete layover?
Can you install NITRO-X on a concrete overlay? Well, you certainly can. Now, part of your challenge is the drainage of that concrete overlay, right? Was it designed properly and built properly with drainage holes to accept that water, proper slope, and free flowing off the edge of that concrete slab to allow water to escape? Think about how much water we're using to install this, right?
Right.
If that water can't drain out, well,
Where's
things
it gonna
aren't
go?
going to drop down into the joint. That slurry isn't going to work its way down into the joint if that joint is full of backed up water that can't drain and go anywhere. So that is one potential issue. The other potential issue is that the permeable material is letting water down into an impermeable situation. So I'd say that if it's designed properly and built properly, sure, go ahead and use NITRO-X. But if nobody thought about drilling holes, if you blocked off the edge of that patio or walkway with mortar, probably not the best idea.
So if by overlay you mean what ICPI specs as an overlay installation, then I would say NITRO-X would be a fine solution. So would polysand. But if you're doing an overlay and you haven't taken drainage into consideration, both of those products are going to incur some difficulties.
All right. All right. So I've got a couple questions for AJ as we're wrapping up here.
Okay.
So how long does it take nitro or NITRO-X to cure?
We said 30 days, it's pressure washer safe, right?
All right. But how long does it take to get hard?
I would say it's going to depend drastically on the temperatures and the weather patterns that you're dealing
That
with.
sounds like a weaselly answer.
They got out of it, didn't I? Yeah.
All right. So we typically say about 18 hours under summer conditions, right? 80 degrees. If you go to colder temperatures or wet conditions, that cure time is going to be dramatically increased. So 80 degrees, 18 hours,
Sure.
right? You go down to 40 degrees, you're probably talking about a week for that nitro to really harden up. So cure times can be greatly extended. In fact, if you drop below freezing, the curing process essentially stops. Now, it's not going to damage the product, but it's not going to continue its process in hardening up.
And I can attest to that because every winter, usually around Christmas, someone from Buffalo calls me and wants to use nitro. And
Bill's Mafia?
Bill's Mafia, So I go out and we install the nitro, and I try to explain to them. And it's an easy thing to explain is it's not going to be a problem. It's just going to take a long time to cure. And we've done it in temperatures that are really pushing what Mike recommends. And
All right. So what is recommended? What are we saying?
37 degrees. And
All right. So it was 15 degrees last night.
Yep.
But it's 37 right now. Can I go install it?
I'd be putting it in there.
You might have a little bit of an issue, right? If the ground is frozen, if the pavers are frozen, what's going to happen to all that water you're spraying all over the place?
They're going to freeze.
You have an ice skating rink,
Yeah,
right?
Could be an issue.
So you got to use it within reason, but above freezing, you can install the Gator Nitro or NITRO-X. How quickly is Nitro or NITRO-X rain safe?
Rain safe from the opening of the bucket, Mike. That felt like a trick question.
Well, pretty much, right? I think that nitro is rain safe immediately. It's sticky, it's a little bit gummier, it's tougher to wash out of the joint. I'd be a little bit more careful with the NITRO-X myself.
Okay.
Passing shower is not going to harm anything, but if you got a thunderstorm forecast, you probably want to give it 6-8 hours to harden up before you're going to see that really heavy rainfall come in. With that rapid flow technology, we don't want it to rapid flow out of the joint.
Right. That's a good point, Mike.
All right. Anything else you can think of?
You're the one throwing questions at me, Mike. I don't got any questions for you.
Jose, we got anything else before we wrap up here?
It's a wrap.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us. Hopefully you learned a couple things. Hopefully we can get some NITRO-X in your hands this year to try out. I know all the Alliance guys are going to be out there and girls are going to be out there pushing it.
Yep, we're going to be out there, a bucket in each arm. Anyone who wants to use it, call us. We got boots on the ground, and we're excited to install these products with you and your customers. So give us a jingle.
All right. So remember, NITRO-X, it doesn't replace polymeric sand. There's always going to be a place for polymeric sand, whether it's those tight joints, those driveways with larger format pavers, or simply a project that can't bear the cost of nitro, right? Nitro and NITRO-X are more expensive joining options than polymeric sand.
Well, you've gone over a couple of instances where polysand is the only option. So.
Yeah, like again, those tight joints, those driveways with larger pavers, you can't get nitro into those 1/16 joints.
So for us old school polysand guys, we're still in the game, and this is a great tool to have in the toolbox as well.
All right, so fantastic new product from Alliance. We're really excited about it, being able to do that true 1/8 of an inch joint, filling it up from top to bottom. New colors, very exciting. I think that that platinum and vanilla will be very popular. Vanilla almost simulating a mortar joint in many cases.
The new colors are very exciting for sure.
And you've got unrivaled strength and performance. It's a really cool product.
It's the Alliance guarantee.
All right, so we're going to send you off with a little recap video of the installation process for NITRO-X. We appreciate you joining us, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, guys.